We're at my house in Pasadena, California, which means that the garbage people might come, the dogs will go crazy, the postman comes, the dogs are going to complain, so you're just going to have to put up with normal urban life stuff. So thank you very much for coming to this. I want to take a little bit of time today to talk about boring history stuff, but I don't think it's actually that boring. It's pretty relevant these days, and important and relevant because of the way that the game industry has evolved over the last couple of years. And I think some of these ideas and some of the lessons that we've learned in the past and that were learned by the people who founded the games industry are super important to remember right now. As the industry evolves more, as it gets both easier to do our jobs, easier to make content, and also harder to differentiate that content and to do things that impress, our fans and consumers. Some of the things that I think about when now as an old man, I look back at the beginning of my career, seem to be important again. So I want to remind us of a little bit of that stuff, and I hope it's not too much of a nostalgia trip. And if it is, I can't see you. This is pre-recorded, so you can throw garbage at the screen or you do whatever you want to do. Yell at me. It's fine. So when I started out in the games industry, it had already been around for I would say 10 to 15 years, really, as a business. But it was very primitive. It was tens and then hundreds of people making games, and it was still the case when I joined a company called Looking Glass, which was my first games job, that you would say you were a game developer or that you made video games. And the response of people would be confusion. They didn't understand. It didn't occur to people at that point that human beings made games. It seemed like a computer thing. You have to remember that up until maybe the mid-90s, most people's experience of video games was seeing them on television or seeing an arcade game, in a market or maybe in an arcade. And lots of them were from Japan, and people had the idea, certainly in the United States, and I think in Europe to some extent as well, that games all came from Japan. And so there was a kind of a concept that video games were perhaps made by aliens in orbit, or that they were somehow automatically made by the machine. And the idea that there were human beings who had to come up with these concepts and make them, and that it was an art form in addition to being a technology, was something that was difficult to explain. And so if you were out amongst the muggles in the world, the civilians as we used to call them, trying to explain what you did for a living, you ended up taking a lot of time telling them that you needed to teach the computer to do these things, and that you needed to come up with the idea for what a game was. And it's understandable. I'm not trying to insult any of these people, but we kind of lose that context today too. I mean, if you think back, or if you think about it, the concept of like 3 lives, which seems as easy as breathing in and out to us now, that had to be invented. There's a guy called Ed Logg who was working on asteroids, which also had to be invented. And he had the idea of this game. And up until that point, games had timers. Maybe you had like 1 life or 1 character after the timer ran out. And really, a lot of video game rule sets were based on pinball and pachinko and other games that existed before. And Ed really decided that he was going to give the player 3 lives and the opportunity, by scoring high, to get maybe another life. And the game could be tuned in that way so that it was challenging but felt fair. And it was an act of intentional creation. It wasn't like archaeologists on a recent dig found the concept of 3 lives in its natural ore vein deep under the earth. A person had to invent that. A person had to invent what real-time animation was. A person had to invent what it was like to feel responsiveness with a controller. All of these things. And I'm not trying to bring this up in order to make you feel bad or to be the ranting of an old man. I'm trying to sort of begin to make a point with this, which is that at the beginning, and really still when I joined the games industry in the early 90s, the options for what we could do were very limited. And so we had to constantly think about what we could accomplish with the very limited resources that were available to us. And so it really focused the mind because we were always thinking about not running out of memory, how much CPU we had. And you could have ambitious ideas. Oh, sure, we always wanted to have 3D characters and animation that, that looked realistic. But we also had, very meager resources. And it helped us to really kind of automatically separate what was important from what wasn't as important. What would make a big difference to players from what wasn't going to make a big difference to players. And those games, if you go look back on them, and when I look at old reviews, when I do a thing that hopefully you will do in your career in a couple of decades, and look back at reviews of early games that I had made, written by modern reviewers as a kind of a, retro review. The thing that they always say about these early games, and especially about the arcade games, which had come about, 5 to 10 years before when I started, is that they're so efficient. They're so well refined, like poetry. And modern reviewers have a great deal of respect for this. And I think it's difficult for them to see that a lot of that, it was genius of the people who made those games, because making games at the time with no tools, no history, and social pressure against you. Everyone you met when you were a game designer at that time would tell you to go get a real job. So there's a lot of really negative social pressure at that time. But these people were really, really smart and really resilient and had to really think very hard about everything that they did. Every decision to do something meant writing a new tool and then educating somebody else how to use that tool, or building something yourself from scratch. Oh, I want to have some sound. Okay, I should go figure out how to do sound. It wasn't like you get an example off GitHub or buy a sound library. It didn't exist. Didn't exist. The idea would occur to you and then you try it out. There wasn't a book you'd go look at. The books were written when people analyzed these games. And it focused the mind. So you didn't have a choice to really think about what was important or what wasn't. And so when I read these reviews and they talk about how beautifully focused these games are, I think it's a great compliment to the guys who designed those games and to us where we design games. But it also wasn't something that we had really a choice about. Now we have a choice. We have a choice to decide what's important in gameplay, what's important in a visual style. We have a choice to decide to mix elements of gameplay and audio, input, VR, AR, all these things. And because we have so much choice, it can be very difficult to find your voice. It can be very difficult to find something that is the edge in your game. And this has caused there to be a real shift, to be honest, in the focus of game development from when I started out and now. At conferences like this, when I was starting out, there was a kind of panic. We would go to forums, we would give talks to one another about, oh my God, how to draw something in 3D, or how to make animation go fast enough on a screen, how to get a frame rate when you're drawing 2D sprites, how to do sprite manipulation, how to have sound and video at the same time without causing a computer to go to a crawl. And it was kind of this kind of shared support. It was almost like we were under attack by physics, under attack by limited computing power, and together, if we banded together and shared enough information, we could defeat this problem and have our games actually get playable. And that focus has now shifted as I look at, for instance, the curriculum for the Game Developers Conference in California that's going on right now. I see that the priority has obviously shifted as the industry has matured to a focus on achieving a real kind of knife edge focus, a real knife edge perspective on what it is you're trying to accomplish in a game, because the opportunities to make games about more things is much greater. And I think that it's helpful to kind of try to put yourself back into the footsteps or a setting where you might have super limited resources. And by that I mean that I think that as we look at the incredible panoply of tools and stuff available to us as game developers today, one way maybe, and this is just an experimental thought of mine, which you're having to sit through, to help to focus the mind, is to put yourself back in 1995. Imagine that you're using a very weak computer and you don't have any tools, that you're going to have to write your own plugin for 3D Studio to import models, and that maybe you should have a 2D game or an isometric game. How does your idea stand out then? Like, what's important about your idea? If you really had to spend 6 months writing your own renderer, would it be worth it? Is the thing you're drawing worth that kind of effort? That's the kind of decision-making process that really helped to hone what we were trying to accomplish when we were making games at Looking Glass. We were doing some of the very first 3D games with physics systems. Because we couldn't do anything, we had to make sure that every single thing our systems did, really, really counted. And it was a very helpful discipline. It's a very hopeful time as well. So I think part of the reason that we see studios today choose a retro style for games is obviously nostalgia, and because pixelated stuff and low poly stuff is a really cool design decision. But it also helps to really focus on gameplay, helps to focus on simple mechanics, helps to focus you on what's important. And really the genesis of the idea for the talk I'm giving you right now, unfortunately for you, was thinking about whether or not those ideas, those design decisions that you're forced to make when you try to make a retro style game and try to replicate that resource scarce design aesthetic that we had to have, could be applied to big AAA games. It could be applied to games that use a lot of technology. And I'll give you a couple of examples of places where this made a big difference that might be so old that nobody talks about them anymore. There's a great game by Peter Molyneux called Dungeon Keeper, and at the time that it was being made, I think it was around 1999 or 2000, it was a very big technological showcase. I mean, Peter always wants to have a really good rendering team. He wants to, draw things that are really surprising. The idea for this game was that you're the operator of the dungeon, and the enemy is the explorers who come in and try to grab your loot. And it's a cool concept. They had some really cool characters. They had really good animation. But the game just wasn't working because they were really focused on the look. They were really focused on being able to draw the dungeon. They were focusing on how the characters behaved, writing AI for the party that would come in, and just generally trying to figure out what it meant to turn the concept of like Dungeons and Dragons on its head. Now you're the dungeon, right? And it wasn't fun. It wasn't fun. And it wasn't fun in a way that's really analogous to the way a lot of sort of mid-development games today are not fun. And there's a kind of a panic in the team, where everybody knows that the game isn't fun, and nobody's playing it, when they're not working because they enjoy it. The play testers aren't doing that thing you need to see them do, which is, stay after their shift to play the game and to learn more. That lets you know that it's really fun. So there's a panic, and maybe nobody is going to say that there's a problem. And this is another, management issue on teams that I don't want to go into here. But if you're in that kind of a state, you know what I mean. If you've ever been in that kind of a state, it's a real panic where you realize that maybe the cool mechanic, the elevator pitch that you had for the game, or the way you've implemented the game, has stuck you in what feels like a concrete corner. You're not going to get out of it because it's not fun. What are we going to do? Well, Peter was stuck in this corner. And what he did was he went home over the weekend and he wrote an ASCII text version of the Dungeon Master game in 2D with little asterisks and minus signs and X's marching around a dungeon drawn in ASCII, and played with it until it was fun. And when it was fun, and it didn't take long because he's a good game designer, and he had programmers, from his company at the time there with him at his house. I'm sure nobody was sober. And it was like a game jam. And it really is kind of also predated when game jams became popular. But it was a focused game jam on just this concept, because they knew that it would be fun to operate the dungeon and put traps, for a party trying to get in and kill the little bastards. But it wasn't working out at the studio. And they made it fun in ASCII. And they developed new ideas about gameplay in the ASCII. And it refined the concepts that they wanted to get to, because they were able to see what the game actually was, absent all of the stuff around it. And at that time, making that 3D, making the sound and everything that went into the quality, the sort of leading edge quality of what was at that time 3D gaming, was a huge distraction against that. And it's a little different today. Now that huge distraction comes because there's so many opportunities. You can make all sorts of things and imagine different worlds and use rendering techniques, and Unity and Unreal have so many ways to spend time making stuff look just so, or do transparency, or this kind of lighting effect with this kind of physics model, and blah, blah, blah. So you can easily lose track of whether or not the game is fun, the mechanics actually working. And they were in that boat, and they got their way out of it by going back to very simple terms. And Peter, when I talked to him about it, he said it felt like being back in his bedroom when he was a teenager, writing games for Sinclair, like for his ZX80, which is a very simple computer, which could do almost nothing. And so even writing an ASCII game on a ZX80 was a real challenge, and you had to be a very good programmer to do it. And so that discipline saved that game. And I don't recall if it was a success or if it made a lot of money or anything, but the story itself of going back to the basics is really important. And I think it's possibly more important now than it's ever been. I think it's important that we just take a minute and remember that the reason games are, in my view, very superior to every other form of entertainment is because it's a story we tell ourselves. It's interactive. You are the protagonist of the game, or you and your friends. You have a shared experience, or an experience in which you surprise yourself with your own abilities, and you are the thing that makes the difference. And that fundamental difference sometimes gets lost because now we have all of the tools of the movie world. We have all of the tools of the sound world. Game soundtracks are every bit as beautiful and artistically relevant and valuable as any type of music, as any type of scoring, as any type of audio endeavor. But because we have all of those assets available to us, it makes it easier to forget the central point, which is that interaction, which is that style of gameplay that differentiates you. The moment-to-moment feel of what it is to be a player, how it feels to move in the world, how it feels to do things, how it makes you feel that you're interacting with an environment or with other players in that environment. And I know everybody talks about this stuff all the time, but even though everybody talks about this stuff all the time, like so many games come out where that is completely lost, where that idea is totally lost. And it's difficult sometimes to figure a way through how you're going to address that, especially if you're in the middle of development, or you're dealing with a limited budget, which everybody is, and you're terrified of this, but you're super excited about your game, but things aren't working about it. It's very, very, very daunting. So what I'm suggesting is maybe go back to some old games, play some old games, familiarize yourself with the way that these very simple old games work. King's Quest, arcade games, the original Zelda. Very, very, very simple games. Look at them. Play them. Get your head in that space. Now, think of your game in that context. If you were to use the Zelda renderer, the original Zelda NES renderer for your game, would your game be fun? How would you do it? And it may be totally irrelevant. Your game may not be possible in that engine, so you have to think of something else. I'm not saying that's a be-all, end-all. But if you simplify and refine your game idea back to that, is it still fun? Is it still something that you would play? And if not, what would you change? And I think in most cases, you're going to start learning about things that are going to help your big game for real in its full rendering glory or stylized glory or whatever it is, because you can go back to the to the very basics of what it is that you're doing. And in other disciplines, in certainly in music, in animation, even in physics, which is what I spend my days doing now, there are analogous processes of going back to the basics, making sure that the Earth is still round under your feet when your head is up in the clouds. And we can do it in games also. We can look at the past. We can learn from the past, not in a nostalgic way, but in a dynamic way, by imagining how those constraints that played into the beauty and the simple power of those concepts can be used for us today. All right, this is enough. You've had enough of the rantings of an old man. Thank you very much for listening. We survived without a postman showing up. We survived without any dogs barking, and I consider to be that, a great victory, which is enough for today. I hope the conference is going well. I wish I could be there with you, specifically so that I could have some excellent Italian food, but it's not going to be, so I'm going to go get a taco here in Pasadena.
Hi everyone, thank you for joining me today and coming to this talk today. I'd like to start just by saying a big thank you to Julia, who introduced me to DStars, and also for DStars, for allowing me this platform just to share some information about our company, 1111 Games, all the work we do in the, ever evolving gaming industry. So, in case you're deciding if this talk is for you or not, I just thought I'd start with a quick overview on what I'll be covering off today. So I guess this talk might be of interest to people looking for a new opportunity, if you're considering working with a recruitment agency for the first time in the games industry, to find your next job, or perhaps even a game studio, or looking to hire talent. And then just lastly, I'll finish off with a small overview on how people can break into this amazing industry. So let's get started. So who are we? 1111 Games. We are a games specialist agency. We pride ourselves on a candidate first philosophy, which I will go into a little bit more detail in the talk a little bit later. But just to keep it really simple, our mission, our vision, everything that we do, our purpose, whatever you might call it, our goal is ultimately to help people discover where they belong. That's something we really believe in. We think recruitment has evolved over the years, which I'm pleased to say it has, which means relationships have become more important, matching has become more important, culture fit has become more important, and that's why we exist. We're kind of the middle person in this hiring process and helping to connect professionals in the games industry to studios they would want to work for or work with. So we, like I said, we really pride ourselves on gathering, knowing our market, studying our market, gathering key market intelligence, tracking data, using smart metrics, to understand the current marketplace and what it's going to take to land the best jobs and the best talent for studios. So it's a strange one, but we represent both sides. So we represent the studios and we also represent the candidates to bring them both together. So, perfect match. Yes, let's talk a little bit about the perfect match. I mentioned earlier we have a philosophy, our candidate first philosophy. So essentially what this means to candidates in the market looking for opportunities is that we have a process we go through to match people to the right studios and job opportunities. We assess people on 4 different levels. I mean, there's a lot more than this, but don't want to bore you with all the details today. But just to give you an overview, a couple of things that we might consider when representing a candidate and their expectations, and helping to find, discover where they belong, I guess. We would look at culture fit, we look at project interest, kind of genres that candidates are interested in, and further to that, we would review somebody's location, situation, can they work remote, can they travel, what's their family situation, will they be relocating children, do we factor in schools, that type of thing. So a lot goes into what we call a discovery call and really getting to know a candidate so that we can represent them in the best way possible. And career aspirations, last but not least. I think it's really, really important to understand how somebody's career goals align with a studio's goals as well. So yes, that's kind of the science, I guess, behind what we do. Just moving on. I guess this ties in nicely with how it's so essential to have the right people in the right seats. Now, this could be, you know, from a studio's perspective, but it's the same for a candidate as well. They want to, obviously, if I was looking for an opportunity, I'd want to make sure that, you know, I'm the right match for not just the position itself, but also the team fit and the culture at the studio. We believe relationships matter. Interestingly, relationships matter is one of our core values at 1111. You know, we, as a team, we value this. It's super important to us, and we also apply this to our studio partners and candidates we represent. Togetherness is at the heart of our culture as a team, but as I mentioned, this extends to the studios and candidates we work with. But we ultimately, I believe it's absolutely critical to each organisation to hire exceptional talent and, you know, to get to know those people, bring teams together. You know, it's important that we're connecting at not just sharing CVs and documentation, but people are spending the time to get to know each other. And that's where the relationship piece comes in. You know, people are important for companies and studios, but the right people are priceless. I mean, as a company, we truly believe, and we've seen this happen, that studios succeed, projects succeed or fail based on having the right people in the right roles at the right time. It really starts with really understanding for a studio what talent you need to succeed in the marketplace, assessing what you have already, identifying the talent gaps, and then executing on obtaining that talent. And the execution piece is where we come on board and help the studios identify, you know, where the talent can come from. So yeah, just really important to kind of, I guess, work on those relationships. I did want to talk a little bit about something I mentioned earlier, which is a candidate first approach that we have as a team, as a company, as a business. We believe that, you know, I guess for us, it's ensuring the candidate has a great experience, no matter what the outcome. One of the things we hear repeatedly in the industry, and it's a huge frustration for people, is that hiring managers, studios, agency reps don't communicate with studios enough, with candidates enough, especially sometimes just on the outcome. So as a company, we have this candidate first approach. These are, I would say, a bit of a framework for the team and I, and it helps us ensure a candidate has the same process no matter what the outcome is, and everyone's treated in the same way. So just to break this down a bit further, we get to know our candidates. We spend time understanding their motivations through, you know, initial discovery calls. We agree on clear communication, which is essential when you're managing somebody's career and you know, helping them transition smoothly from one position to another. So communication is a big one for us. We would talk to the candidate about how they'd like us to communicate, what channels they would like to use, how often they like us to communicate, and we agree all of this. So everyone kind of knows where they stand. We are big on keeping people informed, prepared. Prepared is linked to the interview process. Sometimes we have candidates we're working with in the games industry who are interviewing with multiple studios. So we want to make sure that the candidate is fully informed and prepared and understands the hiring process, understands their commitment, and is really clear on what's going to be expected of them, whether that's a coding test or For one of the artists, it might be an animation test or a design test. It's just these things that might seem sometimes not that important or maybe trivial. What we find, it's absolutely essential to make sure people feel prepared and informed through the entire process, which leads on to matching. This helps us ultimately match effectively, ensuring that we're meeting the needs and wants on both sides and making sure that everyone's aligned and completely clear on the expectations and deliverables. Regular touch points and check-ins. This is a really big one for us. I think sometimes we found from speaking to candidates that if, you know, they've worked with somebody and it just kind of goes very quiet, you know, and there's just a bit of ghosting maybe on either side or both sides. So we don't like to, that's not something I guess we drive here. It's really, really important that we have regular touch points and check-ins. Not too much as well. Again, like I mentioned, we like to discuss this with a candidate and be really clear on how they want us to communicate with them. So touch points and check-ins can be right up to once the job has been accepted and offered. This can be pre-onboarding discussions, visa inquiries, helping people with relocation, looking at schooling for children, you know, helping partners look for potential jobs, whether that's in the games industry or perhaps we can introduce them to, you know, other companies as well, outside of the games industry. Just everything we can to make sure that you know, we are following a candidate first strategy. We are making sure that the candidate is, you know, feeling like they're being looked after and they have a good experience. We always, in terms of outcome, I think it's absolutely essential to share with a candidate whether they've been successful or not. Unfortunately, sometimes people are not successful, and, you know, it can be for a number of reasons, but it's just, we really truly believe that it's important to share that information, try and get feedback where we can, so that somebody understands why the decision has gone either their way or not their way. So again, it all links back to really strong and high communication. And, you know, I guess a last point there is just to make, you know, let candidates know that it doesn't end here. We have, you know, we have so many conversations once people have accepted a job. You know, we're helping people with their careers. It's not just finding people jobs. It is career management is kind of our area of expertise. I guess we can't talk about hiring in the games industry without highlighting some of the challenges that the industry faces, studios face, and also individuals. A really, really big one for us at the moment is, and it has been for a few years now, is diversity, equity and inclusion. We've had conversations with studios, we've worked on initiatives, we've partnered with Women in Games as ambassadors, some of the team here. We work with studios to work on their policies. We've helped a number of studios hire diversity and inclusion managers, which, you know, is really positive to see. And I would just say, as an industry itself, it's a big area of focus, not just for us as a team and as a business. It's really important to us, and it's something that we want to continue to drive alongside our studio partners. And you know, while the goal has always been to strive for diversity and inclusion, we have seen, you know, there have recently been issues brought to light within the games industry where perhaps that's not the case. So there's so much happening in this space. There's so much more that we can do. But, you know, whether that means reaching out to groups who are underrepresented, reaching out to new audiences, looking at getting involved in projects and programs. This is something that's a really big space for us as we grow and as the team does as well, and for our studios. I guess I want to finish on some good news regards to this point. There are changes. There are some, I guess it is slower than maybe some people were expecting, but change is happening, and I guess we're all on this journey together. So yeah. And I guess one last thing I wanted to talk about was something that comes up quite a lot for the team and I here, and I'm sure for lots of our hiring managers as well, is breaking into the games industry. So, I'm constantly asked this question, and I'm sure other studio managers, hiring managers, and people are as well, is, how can I get experience making games when game studios won't even hire me unless I have experience in the games industry. So this is a real pain point actually for us, and it's something that we're working on again to help candidates kind of break into the games industry. As an agency, there's a couple of things we found that have been successful, so I just wanted to share that. There's a few ways of doing this, and obviously part of our job is to make those introductions, and we've actually partnered with a few studios because we hire internationally within AAA, indie studios, startups, mobile, now blockchain. There's so much going on, and we hire from the UK, Europe to North America. We've worked with a number of our studios on different initiatives, to whether that's an internship, which more and more are doing, which are paid internships as well, and looking at projects or programs where people who maybe is university leavers can join at a junior level and work their way up in a studio. Other than that, we always encourage people to get involved in Discord, different groups, different channels, post work where they feel comfortable doing so. Look at game jams, reach out to people in the industry that you admire, drop them a note, find them on LinkedIn, send them a message, ask them if they're help. People love to help. One thing I found working in the games industry is everybody wants to help, everyone is happy to help, lend an ear, advise, support, mentor. If they don't have time for that, you know what it's like in the games industry. Everybody's, working to deadlines and milestones. What I do know is that someone will point you in the right direction if they can't help you. Everyone's looking to help each other, and we've all been in that position before where, trying to get into the industry. So just don't give up, keep reaching out, keep speaking to people. Hopefully you can find a way into this amazing industry. So I guess that's kind of everything today. I was asked to just kind of go through a bit of an overview. I hope that was helpful. It was a fairly broad overview on what we do in the games industry. Hopefully my perspective was helpful, and if there's anything you want to follow up on, or you have any questions, or you'd like me to expand on anything in the talk today, please do feel free to reach out. You can reach me at Subina at 1111uk.com, or just send the DStars team a message. I'd love to connect with you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the event. Thank you so much for listening.
Welcome to my talk today. Thank you so much for watching this talk. Today I want to talk more about how you can find out how others are playing your games. So, for a little bit of context, my name is Johanna Pirker. I'm a professor for games research and game development at Graz University of Technology. I'm a computer scientist, and I'm always really excited to bridge together concepts of computer science, such as data analysis, AI, HCI, virtuality, with game design and game development techniques. And one topic which is really close to my heart is the topic of data analysis in games, which is also one of my major research fields. So today I want to talk about how data is shaping our games and tell a little bit about different techniques which you can apply to also conduct data analysis for your games. Just for a little bit of a motivation, I think especially due to the pandemic, we've also seen how important the games industry is, not only for us as gamers and game developers, but also for the broader society. More people started video games. There has been more research with data on video games. For instance, there was a lovely paper from Oxford showing actually positive benefits for our mental health when playing a video game such as Animal Crossing. We can see quite a rise in game-related platforms such as Twitch, and yeah, it's a really exciting field to be in. But let me start with data analysis, especially big data analysis. Before we start talking about data, we sort of also need to define what is big data, right? Are we talking about hundreds of data sets? Are we talking about millions of data sets? And just a little bit of a spoiler, I really love this definition of data science, big data science, which is big data is anything which is crashing Excel. Okay, I think we can work with that as starting base. So the sort of data analysis we do is usually we look into often millions of user data of interactions, but also if you're now wondering, hey, I have a small game, I'm an indie developer, but I still want to make sense of out of data, this still absolutely works. So we will talk about specific techniques here. What can you do with data analytics? Typical things which you might know from very, very general other fields: market optimization, data exploration, social network, and relationship analysis, which is a little bit my main field, identifying influencers, for instance, fraud detection, and machine-generated data analytics. If we apply this to games, we can think in the field of market optimization. These are typical topics such as monetization optimization. Data exploration would be identifying new markets, for instance. Social network analysis would be also understanding better how players are playing with each other or against each other in multiplayer setups. Fraud detection to identify cheaters early, and machine-generated data analytics. A big spoiler ahead, I'm very interested in the positive impacts of data analytics for our society. So what me and my research group, I'm the leader of a 14-team research group called the Game Lab Graz. We are not doing things like monetization optimization. We are mainly interested in identifying interesting patterns, making games more enjoyable, playable, identifying problems, or understanding the general ideas how the games are, I don't know, game environments are reflecting our society. Just as a little bit of a spoiler ahead, if you were hoping for the marketing tips 101, that's wrong talk for that. And I would like to start already with a little bit of a constant challenge. When we talk about data analytics, I'm so often confronted with this conflict. On the one hand, you have a game designer who has a really strong idea about the game idea, about the strong story. And of course, as a game designer, you want the player to understand the game from their perspective, right? But on the other hand, you have this idea of the player who wants to have this freedom of exploration. And especially one thing which I want to point out often is just happy if they can play the game. Because what I want to point out, data analytics does not mean necessarily that we only focus on trying to adapt the game really based on just the player's needs, but sometimes rather to understand better how players are playing the game and supporting them to play the game like they were supposed to play the game. So for instance, finding traps, finding bugs, finding areas which are just not accessible or like too difficult, and really in the end bring together this idea of having the game designer's concepts, that the player is able to see and explore all those concepts in the best way possible. And yeah, so we also need to understand this concept of, okay, there will be always also the main idea that you want to make revenue with the game and eventually optimize the game. Those are in general possibilities where you can apply data analytics to, but we are not interested in. So the key question I would suggest to look at when working with data analytics, that we do not focus so much on, I want to optimize the game so that I can make most money out of the game. I would not recommend focusing on that, but rather to naturally using data analytics to improve the player's experience and make them being able to play the game and in general and in the best enjoyable, engaging way possible. Because then the players will naturally come play your game and hopefully buy your game. So typical question I am super excited in, for instance, if we look at this this idea, I think I've seen this first in slides from Graham McAllister, who gives really fantastic talks on game usability, by the way. But first of all, if you start a game, you need to start with, do you understand how the game is played, like the controls? So if I press the A button, will the game start, will I be able to jump? And then the mechanics. Mechanics would be, okay, I need to jump in order to jump onto the mushroom's head to get rid of this mushroom. And only after the player understood how to play the game, so first of all, okay, what are like the main controls? A for jumping, B for dashing, for instance. And then the mechanics. Okay, I need to get rid of the mushrooms by jumping on their heads. I could also dash them. And after this learning experience, the player first can tell you or not if they had a good experience at all. This is like this first experience. And then if they can tell you, was it engaging, was it enjoyable? If yes, they continue playing your game. And you have this extended experience, you can get more detailed feedback. If not, yeah, you might do some rework. So key questions we want to understand: does the player understand how to play the game? Can they play the game? How do they play the game? And yeah, can the game experience and the tutorial experience, for instance, be somehow optimized that more players are able to play the game? This is not so much about making it easy or making it super hard. I don't want to go into any Souls or Elden Ring discussions. This is way out of topic. It's really this idea about, can they play the game? Are the controls clear? Is it playable? Are there any lost areas? So when data analytics meets games, our first goal is really to understand the player behavior, to understand better, more inclusive, or maybe more innovative, maybe also more social game experiences. So we can use data to understand and identify patterns in game data, understand who is the player, looking at some statistics on player behavior, for instance, retention rate or how often are they returning. And then on the other hand, we have the social behavior. So one idea would be really focusing on the player itself. The other player would be focusing on the interaction with other players. The social behavior from players. How do we interact with others? How are friendships built? How we can recommend good groups in a social game? Does the game change us somehow, and so on and so forth. So again, on the one hand, it would be really learning more about players, learn more about the games, but eventually we can also use this to learn more about us. So again, I really love this small little GIF. So for instance, what we can see here, this is pretty much summing up what I just said. We created a lovely experience, in this case this wheel, and I as a designer, I had a clear imagination how they're supposed to play our game. Meh, this is not how this game, this guy wants to play that. But this guy is still enjoying the our tool, isn't it? So is this good or is this bad? So what do we want to learn from the players? To understand better what data we need to collect, we really need to understand what we want to learn. And this would be the behavioral patterns. What are players doing while playing the game? Are they, just think of a game like GTA, are they driving constantly with the car? Are they rather interacting with other players? Are they just there for the monster stunts and trying to collect everything? We want to know about their understanding, what the players actually think, what they have to do or what they have done. So if they understand our goals as game designers, the engagement, what keeps them playing, how can we keep them playing, then the entire experience, like what is their current experience, what are their emotions, how do they feel, are they having fun, are they becoming sad, and so on and so forth. And then the social experience, the social behavior of players. A keyword here is the recommender systems. And for those points, I would like to introduce two main concepts. The first one is called behavior profiling. There I will talk about techniques such as clustering. And the second one, for everything for social experiences, I want to introduce social network analysis, which is using graph applications to make sense out of the connection of players. So let's talk about behavior profiling. Many of you might be aware of this concept of the bottled gamer types. This is it's a very simple concept, and there are way more sophisticated concepts out there showing more player types, but I still like to come back to this one because this is so simple and explains this concept that we are all playing games differently very nicely. So Battle looked at multi-user dungeons. I'm pretty sure that many of you are aware of these player types, and he identified that players do have different behaviors when interacting with other players or the world. And he identified players who play very competitive, who are engaged by having better weapons, being in a better ranking than other players, identified them as killers who are acting on other players. Those who love interacting with other players, he identified as socializers. So players who do love interacting with others, forming groups, fighting enemies together. Then there are the players who love acting on the world. Those are called achievers. Those who do have a lot of fun when collecting all different mushrooms, finding all monster stunts, achieving something, getting maybe small little badges or achievements for everything they do. And then explorers, those who are just engaged by like looking through the environment, eventually finding a hidden task, and so on and so forth. And every one of us plays differently, but the important thing is we are most of the time also not only one player type, but for instance, for me, I'm definitely an achiever at some days, probably also a killer, very rarely a socializer, and sometimes an explorer. So this is also something which is dependent on my mood, also on the game. It's not like for every game I'm the same player type. I do have also different patterns how I play in different games. So for instance, I love to call this like the player habit or the player fingerprint. Maybe the player DNA would be a little bit too much sometimes, because again, this is something which might change over time or dependent on the games. And what you can see here, for instance, say we have, just imagine like you have a game where you have a story mode, a campaign, an arena, an online multiplayer, and a local multiplayer mode. And now you can log the data, how the players are playing, what parts of the games they are playing. And you can identify, for instance, with typical cluster analysis, this would be, we use most of the times archetypal analysis. You could also apply k-means. It would be applying machine learning based clustering algorithms. And you can identify then different patterns, clusters based on their behavior. So you would identify a group of players who do have a tendency to play a lot of story. So here, for instance, this is a story mode. Those are the players who are not really interested at all at any multiplayer sections of the games, but they do enjoy the stories. Then you have, for instance, the party player. This is the one who loves the local multiplayer, barely plays any other modes, eventually a little bit of stories to finish the next achievements for the split screen, but nothing else. So you can identify different players, and they might be those player groups and then are a little bit similar. It could be, if you just imagine you looked at 100 players and their interactions, that 2 of those players are the story enjoyers, 80 of them are all-rounders, and then the others are somehow mixed. So it doesn't tell you anything about how many people are within a group, but this is general how you can split or cluster your players into groups. And then from there you can go crazy and make interesting new analysis. For instance, hey, you notice that the story enjoyers are all dropping out at level 3. Why is that? Maybe because they do not have any features interesting enough as story enjoyer to keep them playing. So maybe as a game designer you can introduce something. This is an example from a research team where they looked at Forza and looked at 1.2 million player data, 120 million race data in Forza actually, and they also did a similar clustering, just to give you an overview how this can look like in real life data. The next typical concept we know in game design would be this flow experience. This is always like typical game design concept. Again, game design 101, very, very simple concept, that your game, the current level, the current quest should be always fitting the current skill level of the player. So the challenge the game gives you should match the skill level of the player. This is this flow concept by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. So the more advanced the players get, the more challenging, of course, should be also the next quests they're giving. And because otherwise, if they are already like super experienced and you do not give them a challenge at all, they're bored and will drop out. Whereas if they do not have a skill at all, like Skyrim, you have this small little stick and there's come this giant dragon, you might drop out because you're like overly scared to continue playing the game. And this is like also an interesting concept to look at player data to eventually look a little bit into how this changes within your game. I want to give you one data from one data example from our research. We looked at data from Just Cause 2. So this is a data set which was back then provided by Square Enix. And we looked at the player histories from over 5,000 Just Cause 2 players. They were 2010-ish. And we looked at metrics within the game, such as total kills, total chaos. For those of you who do not know, Just Cause 2 is a game a little bit similar like GTA. You can drive different vehicles. You try to make chaos and save the world. And yeah, And so we looked at different features to give you a little bit of an overview how this looks like. So those are the features, total play time. So for every single player, those were the features we're interested in. How long were they playing in the mission? How much chaos would they make? And what is the kill-death ratio, which is always like a good number if you're interested in the skill level of the player. The kills per minute, deaths per minute, was interesting. And so on and so forth. Kilometers driven, eventually, how likely, like how much fun do they have driving different vehicles, locations discovered, interesting idea if you want to get into finding out how much they like exploration. And this is how such an analysis would look like then. So we would look at the progress along all the missions, and you can already see here, for instance, apparently level 3 is one, which is like, or mission 3, which is a little bit full of action. In level 6, for instance, you have to drive a lot. And yeah. And by applying archetypal analysis, we identified, I think it's 8 different archetypes, clusters basically. The average players, drivers who really love driving, low performers who have the worst kill-death ratio and the most deaths per minute, versus the elite players, for instance, they play the highest difficult levy and have the highest kill-death ratio, and so on and so forth. So, and what we can see, we did this analysis over every single mission, and then we looked closer. Are all the players engaged nicely per mission? So for instance, in the progress, we can identify a very interesting behavior of the elite players in terms of progress, starting with mission 3. Whereas for the kill-death ratio, you can certainly see that the elite players here do have quite high values, especially in mission 3 and 4. And just as an idea, what you can also see, like it drops a lot in level 6. As a game designer, this is the point where you could ask yourself, did I provide enough fun elements or engaging elements for these player types also in this specific level, or is there like a small tweak how I can adjust my game to make this eventually more interesting? To analyze this data visually, we also developed the Sankey diagram, where you can actually see, hey, we have those different player types, and eventually they're changing their behavior from mission to mission. And when are they actually dropping out? So just as a like idea, we have this low performers, which are also like in many other games, low performers eventually are frustrated or not engaged enough and might drop out easily. And here you can really look at the single players who dropped out and who not. But you can also see some of the low performers became rushers from mission 2 to mission 3. So someone who just wants to finish the game but is not so interested in exploring everything. So did you provide enough features for them to be able to also like go through some of the missions more quickly? Those are questions again for you as a game designer to ask yourself. For the last part of my talk, I would like to quickly describe the social network analysis in games. This is a concept which is out there already for so many years, and it's coming from graph theory. And Stanley Milgram, who might be a name to many of you, he conducted like several like psychological experiments, including the one called the 6 degrees of separations. And he was based in Boston, I think in Harvard back then, and he was interested in how well are people connected in the US all over the places. So what he did, he sent packages to different people, random people all around the US, and told them, hey, there's one lawyer in Boston, please send him this package, but not directly to him, but send it to someone who you know, who you think might know this one in person. what he did, he sent this package to a random person in Kansas and told them, hey, there's this lawyer called blah 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 in Boston, and please try to send him this package through people you might think would know him. So what this person in Kansas does, he thinks, hey, I don't know this lawyer, but I do know another lawyer who might know him in Iowa. So I'm gonna send him this package. This lawyer in Iowa thought, oh, I don't know any other lawyer, so I'm just gonna send it to Indiana because it's just like closer to Boston. And what he found that in average, when the package got delivered, so there were some which never found their way, that in average it was 5.5, the average distance between the people. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and here 6. So the average degree was around 5.5 if you calculate all the sent packages. This study was repeated quite often. In 2008, for instance, Microsoft did a similar study with MSN users and found the average connection between all users was 6.6. It would be also the same, like if I ask myself, okay, what is my handshake connection to Obama? So do I know someone who might know someone who might know Obama? Then my handshake connection would be 3. In Facebook, the average connection was 3.5. It's also called the Kevin Bacon number. So everyone who played in a movie together with Kevin Bacon has a big number of 1. And just to give you a little bit of idea what this looks like, I still propose that we need something like this in game development too. This could be the karmic number. So if someone developed a game with karmic, it's the karmic number 1 and so on and so forth. It could be the Romero number, but it's just not fair to find a good number name. So I would keep it really neutral and would go propose the Pirker number. To see what is a good connection to other game. Just kidding. But just to give you a little bit of an idea what social network analysis is and how this works. And now going back to player networks. If we think of games now, so if 2 players in a multiplayer games did play against or with each other, we can build a line between them. We call this, for instance, this is a typical network based on graphs. Player A and player B played with each other. This is not directed. If we know, for instance, that player B did follow player C, but player C did never follow back, then it would be a directed network when we do have directed links. When we know, for instance, hey, player A and player B, they have already played 3 matches together, we can also build a weighted network. So this is a typical player network where the vertices are the players and the links and the edges are actually how many matches did they play with each other. And to finalize, we used this method, for instance, to analyze the game Destiny, open online shooter. And we were interested in if players are playing better, if they are often playing with the same people, or if they're getting better if they play with strangers. What is the retention? What are important nodes? What are potential influences, and so on and so forth. So this would be a typical data analysis you can do. So I would always recommend that that this is a method which is super powerful and can have a big impact not only on identifying more about the players but also find more about us. So what I already mentioned earlier, this example of Animal Crossing, where they used also data analysis to find out more about our mental health. And last but not least, I really want to point out that you need to be careful with those techniques. So this was just like a starting point to give you some ideas. what data analysis actually can do, but there are plenty of concerns which we cannot cover in this talk anymore, but things like correlations, wrong correlations, and especially a not nice ethical use of data analytics. So for instance, you need to be careful what you're celebrating without having a bigger context on the topic. So thank you so much for listening to this talk. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Bye.